Have you ever wondered why people see the world so differently? Why some crave rules and order, while others question everything, seeking deeper meaning? What if ego, the very sense of I, isn't fixed, but actually evolves? From simple impulses, to self-awareness, to full psychological maturity. In the 1970s, psychologist Jane Loevinger mapped this inner journey in what's called the ego development theory, a framework describing how our understanding of ourselves and others grows through distinct stages. Each level reflects not just how we think, but how we make meaning, how we interpret life, relationships, and morality. In this video, we'll explore these levels, from the impulsive child to the integrated self, and uncover how ego development shapes consciousness, empathy, and personal freedom. Let's begin. The first step in ego development begins with raw experience, the impulsive stage. At this level, the self is ruled entirely by emotion and instinct. There is no filter, no long-term thinking, no real understanding of cause and effect. Desires rise and the person acts. Fear arises and they react. This is the psychological world of early childhood, a space where needs feel absolute and the boundary between self and world is still forming. Imagine a toddler reaching for a toy or crying the moment something is taken away. In that instant, the feeling is everything. There's no concept of waiting, sharing, or reasoning. For someone in the impulsive stage, rules don't yet make sense. They might obey to avoid punishment, but not because they understand why the rule exists. The emotional tone of this stage is powerful but unstable. Anger, joy, fear, and curiosity all appear in flashes, intense, fleeting, and unfiltered. Relationships are simple. People are good when they give pleasure and bad when they frustrate. Adults can also operate from this stage, especially in moments of stress, trauma, or regression. Think of an argument where someone lashes out, slams a door, or says things they don't mean. That's the impulsive ego taking control. In this level, there's little self-reflection. There's no narrative of who I am, only the moment-to-moment stream of feelings. But within this chaos lies the seed of growth. Every cry for attention, every burst of emotion is actually the ego's way of saying, I exist, I feel, I want. It's the very beginning of selfhood. And as awareness slowly expands, the person begins to realize that the world has rules and that others can't simply be controlled by emotion. That realization gives rise to the next stage, the self-protective level, where the ego learns to navigate a world of power, rules, and consequences. The journey of ego continues into the self-protective stage, a world no longer ruled purely by emotion, but by the instinct to survive, to win, and to stay out of trouble. At this level, the person begins to recognize rules, but only as something to manage, not yet to believe in. Morality becomes practical. What do I get? And how do I avoid getting caught? Imagine a child who takes a cookie and says, I didn't do it, even though crumbs cover their face. In their mind, the problem isn't taking the cookie, it's being punished for it. The goal is self-protection, not honesty. This is the stage of clever self-interest. Rules, rewards, and punishments are seen as tools to manipulate outcomes. The developing ego has discovered strategy. You might hear phrases like, it's not fair, or I only did it because she did it first. Everything is filtered through personal consequence, how it affects me. In adults, this mindset can appear as the person who always looks for loopholes, who does the bare minimum to avoid blame, or who charms others when it benefits them, but withdraws when it doesn't. They might seem pragmatic or street-smart, yet struggle with empathy or true cooperation. Relationships at this level are transactional. Loyalty is conditional. I'll help you if you help me. When things go wrong, blame quickly shifts outward. Responsibility feels dangerous because it could invite criticism. Emotionally, this stage offers more control than the impulsive one. Anger can be hidden, guilt can be faked, but the self is still fragile beneath the surface. There's little tolerance for vulnerability, and pride becomes armor. Still, there's growth here. The self-protective person has learned that the world runs on cause and effect. Actions have outcomes. Choices have consequences. And in that understanding, a new layer of consciousness begins to form, the awareness that belonging and approval might matter more than power. That realization leads into the next great shift, the conformist stage, where the ego starts to trade self-protection for acceptance and begins to live by the rules of the group. The third step in ego's unfolding is the conformist stage, a turning point where the self begins to trade personal gain for social belonging. At this level, life is organized around rules, expectations, and approval. The question shifts from how do I stay out of trouble to how can I be a good person, the kind everyone likes and respects. For the first time, the ego starts to see itself as part of a larger group, a family, a team, a culture. And with that realization comes a powerful desire to fit in. Imagine a child proudly saying, "My teacher says I'm very well behaved," or a teenager terrified of being left out of the friend's circle. They follow the rules not out of fear, but because belonging feels essential to survival. The conformist sees the world in clear categories, right and wrong, good and bad, us and them. Nuance hasn't yet entered the picture. The rules define identity. Being different can feel unsafe, even shameful. In adults, this mindset often appears as loyalty to tradition, group norms, or authority figures. The person finds comfort in routine and shared values, in doing what's expected. They might say things like, "This is just how it's done," or "I don't want people to think badly of me." Morality here is externalized, based on what others approve of. Reputation and image matter deeply. Breaking a social rule feels not just wrong, but humiliating. In relationships, conformists value harmony and reliability. They are caring friends, devoted partners, and responsible citizens, but they can struggle when faced with difference or ambiguity. Conformity brings order, yet it also limits curiosity. Picture a workplace team where everyone nods in agreement, even when they quietly disagree, or a community that excludes outsiders to preserve its sense of unity. These are expressions of the conformist ego, where connection is maintained through sameness. And yet, beneath that order, something begins to stir, a faint awareness that not everyone sees the world the same way, that other perspectives might exist, and that rules, while useful, are human creations. When this curiosity grows strong enough to challenge conformity, the ego begins to evolve again into the next stage, the self-aware level, where individuality, reflection, and empathy start to bloom. With the self-aware stage, something remarkable happens. The ego looks up from the rules of the group and begins to see itself. For the first time, the person realizes that their thoughts, feelings, and actions come from within, not just from what others expect. There is an inner world now, a private space of reflection. The self-aware person can think, "I feel angry, but I don't have to act on it," or "I know my friend sees this differently." This simple act of noticing marks the birth of psychological depth. Imagine a teenager who begins questioning family traditions, not to rebel, but to understand what they personally believe. They might say, "I know my parents mean well, but I want to decide what's right for me." This is no longer blind conformity, it's the start of individuality. In adults, the self-aware mindset often shows up as a growing curiosity about human behavior. People become interested in motivation, emotion, and complexity. They start reading psychology books, keeping journals, or seeking therapy. They sense that life isn't just about roles or reputation, but about meaning. They can hold two ideas at once, that someone can be wrong yet have good intentions, that love can coexist with frustration. The black and white morality of the conformist stage begins to soften into shades of gray. Socially, this person still cares about belonging, but they no longer want to lose themselves in the group. They value authenticity, they want to be liked, but also to be real. Think of an employee who finally tells their boss, "I appreciate your feedback, but I'd like to do this my way." Or a parent who apologizes to their child after overreacting. These are glimpses of the self-aware ego in action, accountable, reflective, and capable of empathy. Emotionally, this stage brings both freedom and fragility. With new awareness comes new doubt. You begin to see the complexity of people, and sometimes that's unsettling, but it's also the beginning of wisdom. The self-aware person begins to realize, my thoughts are just thoughts, my feelings don't define me, and the way I see the world isn't the only way. From here, ego development takes another profound leap into the conscientious stage, where personal values and responsibility become the guiding forces of life. At the conscientious stage, the ego takes a decisive step toward maturity. Here, the person begins to live not by the rules of others, but by values they have chosen for themselves. Conscience replaces conformity. Integrity replaces image. This stage marks the birth of true inner guidance. The person starts to ask, "What do I believe is right?" instead of, "What will others think of me?" They can now reflect on motives, ethics, and consequences, not just for themselves, but for others, and even for society as a whole. Imagine a young adult who once followed family expectations, but now says, "I know you want me to take over the business, but my heart's in social work." It's no longer rebellion, it's alignment with personal truth. In adults, the conscientious mindset shows up as reliability, honesty, and moral awareness. These individuals hold themselves to high standards, sometimes too high. They may feel guilt or self-criticism when they fall short of their ideals. They believe that people should take responsibility for their actions and that integrity matters more than approval. They value purpose over pleasure and principle over popularity. Picture a journalist who refuses to alter a story to please sponsors, or a manager who takes accountability when a project fails. These are the quiet strengths of the conscientious ego, where self-respect outweighs image. Emotionally, this stage can feel heavy at times. With awareness of right and wrong comes moral burden. The person might struggle with perfectionism, feeling that there is always more they could have done. But this sense of duty also becomes a source of deep meaning. Relationships at this level are built on trust and authenticity. They can tolerate conflict because honesty matters more than pretending. The conscientious individual begins to see that everyone has a unique path. They learn to respect difference even when they disagree. The rigid shoulds of earlier stages give way to understanding, and in that understanding, compassion begins to grow not as a rule, but as a lived truth. This stage often marks a person's entry into genuine adulthood, where choices come from reflection and where self-awareness is balanced with moral purpose. Yet even this hard-won stability is not the end. Beyond conscience lies another evolution, a deeper empathy and flexibility, where life is seen through multiple perspectives at once. That next transformation is the individualistic stage, where the ego begins to dissolve its rigid boundaries and embrace the beautiful complexity of being human. At the individualistic stage, the ego opens its eyes to the vast landscape of human experience. Here, the person begins to realize something profound. Truth is not singular. People see the world through different lenses, and each lens makes sense from where it stands. This is the birth of psychological pluralism, the understanding that reality can be interpreted in many ways. After years of striving to be right, the individualistic person starts to ask, what if there isn't only one right answer? They can step outside their own beliefs and observe themselves with curiosity instead of judgment. They see contradictions not as flaws, but as signs of growth. Imagine a professional who once measured success by achievement now realizing that meaning comes from balance and authenticity. They might say, I love my work, but I'm more than my job. Or think of a parent who recognizes their child's individuality, saying, I don't want them to be like me, I want them to become who they truly are. At this stage, empathy deepens. The individualistic person can understand others' experiences even when they disagree or cannot relate. They see people as unique systems of stories, values, and emotions. They're comfortable with paradox, that love can exist without agreement, that freedom can coexist with responsibility, that strength includes vulnerability. In relationships, this stage brings authenticity and openness. Conversations move beyond who's right to what's real for you and what's real for me. Boundaries are respected, not as walls, but as edges of selfhood. Yet this new awareness can also be isolating. The individualistic person often feels misunderstood. They see complexity where others see simplicity. They might struggle to explain their insights to those still seeking certainty. It's the loneliness of waking up, seeing the full spectrum of color, while others insist the world is black and white. But this stage is a gateway to freedom. The ego is no longer trapped by conformity, nor by moral rigidity. It becomes flexible, able to adapt, reflect, and grow. The person realizes that selfhood is not a mask, but an ongoing dialogue with life. And from this place of expanded awareness emerges the next transformation, the autonomous stage, where the self finds harmony between independence and connection, and begins to live with compassion, purpose, and inner peace. At the autonomous stage, the ego becomes both grounded and spacious. It no longer clings to identity, nor fears the complexity of life. Instead, it embraces autonomy, the ability to think, feel, and act from inner freedom. Here, independence and interdependence finally coexist. The person understands that being oneself does not mean standing apart from others, but standing authentically within the web of relationships. Autonomous individuals have a strong sense of self, yet they are not ruled by ego. They can own their emotions without being possessed by them. They can admit mistakes, forgive others, and tolerate ambiguity without needing resolution. Imagine a leader who once needed control, but now leads through trust and transparency. They empower others rather than dominate them. They no longer see disagreement as a threat, they see it as dialogue. Or think of a partner in a mature relationship who says, I love you deeply and I also respect your independence. They can hold connection without attachment, love without possession. The autonomous person recognizes that people are different, not because one is right and the other is wrong, but because each is shaped by their own truth. This understanding brings compassion, a quiet, steady empathy that doesn't need to fix or judge. Morality at this level is deeply personal. It flows from inner principles rather than outer rules. The person asks not, what's acceptable, but what aligns with my deepest integrity? In society, autonomous individuals often become bridge builders, mediators, teachers, healers, or visionaries. They move comfortably between perspectives, helping others see the humanity beneath conflict. Yet, autonomy is not detachment. It is engaged freedom, the kind that listens deeply, acts responsibly, and holds both joy and sorrow without being consumed. They can say, yes, life is uncertain, and still, I choose to live with purpose. This stage is marked by psychological integration. The person no longer seeks perfection, they seek wholeness. They have made peace with the contradictions within themselves, and from that peace, they extend understanding to others. It's a state of inner spaciousness, where ego becomes transparent, a lens rather than a wall. But even this maturity is not the final step. Beyond autonomy lies a quieter, rarer form of awareness, a state where the self itself begins to dissolve into something larger, where identity, meaning, and compassion merge into unity. That is the final stage, the integrated level, the culmination of ego's long journey toward transcendence. At the integrated stage, the ego reaches its most expansive and mature form. Here, the boundaries between self and world begin to soften. Identity is no longer a cage, it becomes a window. The person has journeyed through impulse, conformity, reflection, and conscience, and has emerged into something far more fluid, a state of integration. In this stage, opposites are no longer enemies. Joy and sorrow, strength and vulnerability, gain and loss, all are recognized as parts of the same whole. The person doesn't need to choose one over the other. They can hold paradox without confusion and live with uncertainty without fear. The integrated self accepts that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Imagine an older mentor who has seen both success and failure and speaks not from pride but from peace. They say things like, "Everything that happened taught me something," or "I no longer need to be right, I just need to be kind." At this level, the individual feels deeply connected to humanity, to nature, to the flow of existence itself. Their sense of self expands beyond personal identity. They begin to experience what psychologists sometimes call ego transcendence. It's not the loss of self, but its transformation. The ego becomes a servant to awareness rather than its master. Relationships at this level are rooted in compassion and presence. There is no need to control, convince, or compare. Each person is allowed to be who they are, because the integrated individual recognizes themselves in everyone. In work and creativity, they act from alignment rather than ambition. Their motivation is no longer achievement, but contribution. They don't seek recognition, they radiate it. You might notice this stage in spiritual teachers, visionary leaders, or ordinary people who carry a quiet wisdom. They move slowly, speak deliberately, and seem untouched by chaos, not because they ignore it, but because they see through it. The integrated ego is aware that life contains both light and shadow. Rather than escaping suffering, it learns from it. Rather than avoiding death, it embraces impermanence as part of the human story. And perhaps most beautifully, this stage is marked by humility. The person no longer identifies with their growth. They don't claim enlightenment. They simply are. They know that development is not a ladder to climb, but a rhythm, a breathing in and out of awareness. Here, consciousness and compassion merge. The ego, once rigid and defensive, has become transparent, a clear channel through which life expresses itself. This is not the end of the journey, but the point where journey and destination become one, where the self realizes that it was never separate to begin with. And in that realization, the ego's long pilgrimage comes full circle, not dissolved, but transformed into wisdom, presence, and peace. And so the story of ego development comes full circle, from the raw impulses of childhood to the boundless awareness of integration. Each level, impulsive, self-protective, conformist, self-aware, conscientious, individualistic, autonomous, and finally integrated, is not a destination, but a chapter in the lifelong evolution of consciousness. We begin as creatures of instinct, driven by desire and fear. Then we learn the language of rules and the comfort of belonging. We strive for approval, then awaken to individuality. We build values, discover empathy, and finally touch the quiet unity beneath it all. No stage is better than another. Each one serves a purpose. We need the impulse to feel alive, the rules to find order, the reflection to find truth, and compassion to find meaning. In truth, we move through these levels every day. A part of us is still the impulsive child, the protective survivor, the loyal conformist, the reflective seeker, and the autonomous soul learning to let go. Ego development is not about escaping who we were, it's about including every version of ourselves in a larger, wiser whole. As psychologist Jane Loevinger saw it, the ego's purpose is not to disappear, but to grow, to become a vessel for awareness, a bridge between self and world. So wherever you find yourself on this journey, remember, each moment of honesty, reflection, and compassion is a step toward integration. The path of the ego is the path of being human, messy, miraculous, and endlessly unfolding. Because in the end, the ego's greatest realization is that it was never separate from the whole it was trying to understand.